Barbara Brodkin. In 1993, Barbara Brodkin, a single mother, resided at 155 Balliol Street in Toronto, Canada, with her 6-year-old son Zachary. Barbara worked hard at several jobs, going above and beyond to support her kid and herself. Zachary woke up at 7:40 a.m. on March 19, 1993, to discover the house was strangely silent. Normally, Barbara would wake Zachary up for breakfast every morning, but this particular day she had forgotten to do so. Zachary went to peek at his mother in her bedroom when she didn't come to his room and saw an unsettling sight. In her bedroom, his mother lay in a pool of blood next to a closet. The 6-year-old, horrified, succeeded in contacting the emergency services number. An officer was sent to the apartment on Balliol Street. When police arrived at the apartment, they discovered Barbara's lifeless body just as the distraught 6-year-old had described it in the 911 call. Barbara had suffered from beatings, strangulations, and knife stabbings. Barbara had turned to selling cannabis in order to support her son, and she had hidden a tiny amount of the plant in her closet. At the time, police surmised that the reason for her death was theft because a cosmetic case containing cash and narcotics was gone from the closet. After an examination, her cause of death was finally identified as a single heart stab wound, even though she appeared to have been strangled. Detectives concluded that Barbara was slain sometime during the night when her 6-year-old was sleeping based on the autopsy's determination of her time of death. The jumbled things in her room indicated that Barbara had put up a strong fight against her assailant. Investigators found that during the attack, the attacker had imprisoned her within the closet. Under Barbara's fingernails, law enforcement found DNA evidence that proved she was able to fight off her attacker and preserve his DNA by scratching him with her nails. Barbara's fingernails were used to gather DNA evidence, which law enforcement then removed and stored for later examination. Although Barbara conducted interviews with her cannabis clients, no meaningful leads or information surfaced from those conversations. Eventually, suspicions would be directed at her former spouse, Christopher Berry. In the late 1980s, she and Berry tied the knot. But the couple's marriage was everything but a marriage made in heaven, and they eventually filed for divorce. It was discovered that Berry had abused and used violence toward Barbara. Following their divorce, they got involved in a contentious custody dispute over their son Zachary, which was still going on when Barbara passed away. Berry was thought to have threatened Barbara verbally multiple times before her death because he lived close to the mother and son. The Toronto police were sure that Berry would be found guilty and that this would be an easy case to solve. Berry was taken in to be questioned. He asserted his innocence and stated that he was with his girlfriend when the crime occurred. His alibi was confirmed by his girlfriend. Police conducted numerous interviews and investigations, but they were unable to connect Berry to the crime. Berry voluntarily gave his DNA sample when the police asked for it to be compared to the DNA found under Barbara's fingernails. Berry passed away in 2009, and authorities were still certain that he was the murderer. Police examined about 300 witnesses, people of interest, and anyone who could have known more about the crime throughout the years. While several suspects were investigated, none of them were ever legally charged. The case would ultimately end in limbo despite community involvement and concern. However, in 2017, the police resumed their investigation and sent Barbara's fingernails to the Center for Forensic Science once more. The DNA under the fingernails was used to construct a DNA profile, which was then uploaded into a database and cross-referenced with Berry's DNA. The results of the DNA test, however, shocked the detectives by ruling Berry out as a suspect. Charles Mustard, one of Barbara's acquaintances, would soon be identified by the DNA. At the time, 37-year-old Charles Mustard had taught elementary school and had a long criminal history. Charles was fired from a Thornhill school after he was accused of 8 counts of sexual assault around the time of the murder. Charles was requested to come down to police headquarters on October 18, 2018, the day before he was arrested, ostensibly to complete some paperwork. He had no idea that the officers had set up a poster of Barbara in the lobby, her name plainly displayed, so they could watch his reaction and record the interaction in secret. He's seen in the footage that was captured intently studying the pictures. Charles stated in court that he did not identify Barbara in the pictures. But given that he had already claimed to be her friend and to have purchased $50 worth of cannabis from her not long before her death, the judge referred to it as a, quote, a flagrant and apparent lie. Charles admitted to the court during the cross-examination that although he was aware at the time that the pictures were of Barbara, he was unaware of this when he first saw them. Charles didn't have a job at the time, and the prosecutor thought he killed Barbara in order to steal the money and the cannabis, leaving behind a helpless 6-year-old who had to grow up without a mother. During his trial, Charles stated that he worked a shift from 3 p.m. to midnight on March 19, 1993, at a seafood restaurant in Barrie. But he couldn't remember the name of the eatery or who his previous employer was. Charles objected to the accusations, arguing that the DNA had to have come from a joint he shared with Barbara just before she was killed. He said he had put a layer of saliva on the joint to keep it from burning out and that Barbara might have accidentally touched his palm. Charles maintained that her violent former spouse was the true murderer and that he did not require money. The prosecutor countered that he was not a friend of Barbara's and that he was unemployed at the time. The prosecutor continued by claiming that Barbara had never smoked a joint with Charles and asked why, exactly, she would use both hands if she did smoke a joint with mustard. Furthermore, Barry's DNA did not match the DNA discovered under Barbara's fingernails, and he had a strong alibi, ruling out his involvement as the murderer. The prosecutor was supported by the judge. During the attack, Barbara had bravely tried to defend herself by scratching Charles. They said that this was the only way his DNA could have passed under her nails. It couldn't have happened by passing a damp joint. Charles Mustard was convicted of Barbara Brodkin's murder in April 2023 and given a 15-year prison term without the possibility of release. When Charles Mustard is free to be released, he will be 83 years old. The family will never be able to fill the void that Barbara's passing left in their hearts, even though the matter was resolved after 30 years. If you're fascinated by true crime and enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up to stay updated on all our latest content. Moving on to the next case. Claudette Jean. On February 16, 1986, hikers on the Pacific Crest Trail discovered a grizzly bear near the Los Coyotes Indian Reservation. A partially decomposed woman's body was discovered at the outskirts of the encampment. As soon as they arrived on the site, the San Diego County Sheriff's Office began their investigation. The San Diego County Sheriff's Office received a call shortly after that would fundamentally alter the course of events. A man found 14 kilometers from the female victim was in a similar state. The two murder victims were buried under bulky jackets and layers of clothes. Investigators realized that before their killer could be located, they had to identify both remains due to their remarkable similarities. Law enforcement has concealed a lot of information in these two cases. The individual who was found 14 miles distant never had his cause of death revealed in order to protect the integrity of the investigation. It was difficult for the detectives to proceed with either of the cases. The evidence was scant, and what little the San Diego County Sheriff's Office did have was withheld from the press. The media briefly covered Jane Doe's murder before attention faded. The female victim's case would remain unresolved for decades, despite the San Diego County Sheriff's Office knowing that a family was out there searching for their loved one. That is, until 2023, when the office started utilizing genetic genealogy. The hair of Jane Doe was submitted for analysis on websites such as 23andMe and GEDmatch. Together with census data and other publicly available information, detectives were able to use this DNA research to build family trees and find relatives. Finding the missing connection was the only task left to the investigators after determining the victim's family tree. Law authorities swiftly recognized the Jane Doe as Claudette Jean Zabolski Powers when she submitted her DNA. When Claudette Jean was brutally murdered, she would have been 24 years old. Detectives put together her life before to her abduction in the early 1980s. She was married and had 2 children. She moved to Washington with her spouse after they sold their Michigan house. After Claudette filed for divorce in 1983, she and her 2 girls were able to purchase a home in San Diego County. But tragedy struck the Powers family in 1984 when her father passed away. When her father passed away, Claudette didn't handle it well. She felt lost after her father passed away because she loved him so much. Family members claim that in September 1984, at her father's burial, Claudette was last seen or talked to. She disappeared entirely from the face of the planet. According to her relatives, they never gave up looking for her. Her siblings recruited a private investigator to assist in their search for her when it appeared impossible to find her. Still, it produced no results. Then, all they could hope for was that she would return home eventually. For all these years, her family was ignorant that she had passed dead because she was never officially reported missing. Even though her identity has been revealed, the inquiry is far from finished. It is now up to the authorities to piece together Claudette's life between September 1984 and September 1986. Anybody with knowledge or who may have known Claudette is asked to come forward. There have been rumors that she worked as a waitress in Escondido. Her family is having a very hard time. In a statement, her sister Laura Fries informed the reporters, "If you know of my sister, you have seen her, you have worked with her." That would have been in the early 1980s, early 1990s, or early 1985 when she went missing. Tell the San Diego Sheriff's Department all you know about her, please. The events are known to someone. The San Diego County Sheriff's Office has not released the cause of death for either Claudette or John Doe. The investigation is still underway. According to their statements, Claudette passed away violently, and they are looking for a male suspect. Besides, they want to know who killed the guy. They said that they were both dressed in thermals and other camping-appropriate clothing, and that the man was roughly Claudette's age, in his mid-20s. It took almost 2 weeks for them to both pass away before their bodies were found. There were no additional found personal goods, bags, or handbags holding camping gear. The crime scene was far distant, thus getting there would have required a car. As of right now, there are no sketches or other identifying characteristics of John Doe. Following Claudette Jean Zabolski Powers' DNA match, her youngest sister Laura Frias, who had been concerned about her for years, was informed. In an interview, Laura recalled her sister, Claudette, as a loving and considerate mother. She loved her kids very much. She was quite fond of her family. She went on to say that since their oldest kid has been found, their mother can die in peace when the time comes. There is currently a $1,000 reward for information leading to the apprehension of Claudette's murderer. Moving on to the next case. Dr. Gaines Huey. Dr. Gaines Huey, a Walton dentist, left for work on June 5, 1976 in Union, Kentucky, as usual. As he was traveling along Chambers Road, he noticed a dead adolescent girl's body by the side of the road, close to a culvert. The State Police of Kentucky were contacted. Trooper Jan Washner and his squad from the Walton State Police Department arrived on the scene at approximately 7:15 a.m. Although there were several wounds and bruises on the victim's body, the head wound was the most severe. Deep strangling marks surrounding the neck were also found by the investigators. As they investigated the crime scene, they found flattened grass and shattered twigs. The body had obviously been dragged here. The crime site was free of bloodstains. The crime took place at another location. This was only a place to dump stuff. The murderer made absolutely no attempt to conceal the body. It was put out in the open as though he wanted people to find it. Despite searching the area, investigators were unable to locate any clues, fingerprints, or the deadly weapon. Detective Warshner had no leads to pursue in the absence of witnesses or hard proof. After the crime scene investigation produced no results, detectives looked into the victim's body for information. Her body was taken to the lab of the county medical examiner to be autopsied. She had been the victim of a brutal assault, according to the post-mortem results. Extreme force was applied when using a tire iron as a weapon. The victim's face, severely bruised and swollen, was almost unrecognizable. Her skull was clearly severely lacerated. There were obvious indicators of severe physical trauma and genital assault. The cause was identified as manual strangulation, asphyxia, and blunt force injuries to the head. Just when there was no more hope, the forensic team achieved a breakthrough. On the victim's clothing, they found DNA from another country. However, no match was discovered when the DNA sample was searched through the central database. The case file began to gather dust and eventually went cold as there were no further leads. The girl, who was only 16 years old, met such a cruel end to her life. Carol Sue Claver was her given name. Born and bred in Boone County, Kentucky, Carol Sue Claver joined the world in 1960. As a senior, she went to Dixie Heights High School. Carol Sue was well known for her love of music in addition to being an excellent student. She was a violinist and pianist. She was quite active in the school band, which developed into a big aspect of her life. Carol was not merely a musician and a student. She was a devoted sister as well. Charles and Thomas Claver, her brothers, were very close to her. Carol Sue's father died of heart failure when she was just 10 years old. Although Carol Sue lived a very typical life in a small town, her regular trips to DeValle Park in western Covington, Kentucky, were what really made her stand out. DeValle Park served as her haven, her go-to spot for relaxation, and her social center during a time when face-to-face encounters were the only means of communication. She loved riding her bike and having deep chats with pals here. Carol was well-liked by her acquaintances that she met at DeValle Park because of her gregarious and charismatic personality. She rode her bike to the park on June 4th at about 5:30 p.m. The plan was to go to Z's Hyde Park restaurant for dinner with pals. But witnesses at the park saw her conversing with a stranger rather than hanging out with her pals. He stood at about 5 feet 10 inches tall, with a thin body and shoulder-length sandy blonde hair. He either drove a Chevy Monte Carlo or an amazing Pontiac Grand Prix. Together, they exited the park. She was observed loading her bicycle into the man's vehicle's trunk. After that, the man took her home, where her neighbors witnessed her removing the bicycle from the vehicle. She entered, but the automobile did not immediately drive off. It was idle in the driveway as it stood there. Carol Sue reappeared a few minutes later, changed into new clothes, and walked out with the same man. She was last observed alive at this location. The authorities notified her family of a body they had found that remarkably resembled Carol Sue when they reported her missing. Thomas, her brother, fearlessly entered the morgue to verify the unbelievable reality. Yes, that was Carol Sue. Days became years, and the Carol Sue case remained unresolved until it finally went cold. Her family and friends could only hope for the answers and closure that were painfully out of reach with every second that went by. Carol Sue's execution offered a ray of hope following years of stillness. Coy Cox and Tina Adams, two cold case investigators, revisited the investigation in 2017. They collaborated with Jerry Keith, the original investigator who was an authority on the Carol Sue case but is now retired. Together, the three of them went through the case file page by page, searching for information from an entirely different angle. Cox and Adams started their search by going over the two suspects Keith had previously pointed out. The initial lead involved a man whose past auto theft history matched Carol's last ever vehicle description. They located him and asked him some questions. It was amazing how helpful the individual was given his criminal record. He did not cower behind a legal team, but he flatly denied any involvement in Carol's murder. He was aware that his past transgressions put him under suspicion, but he steadfastly maintained his innocence in Carol's incident. Adams and Cox requested a DNA test, and he voluntarily supplied a sample. The long wait was over, and the results were released in December 2018. His DNA did not match the foreign material discovered on the girl's clothing. He wasn't the one who did it. In 2020, after eliminating their first suspect, Cox and Adam turned their attention to the second suspect. 2 years after Carol's body was found on October 1st, 1978, their focus narrowed in on an unidentified attacker who had carried out a similar crime in the same area. The victim's continued existence is the only distinction. The victim of the crime on October 1st, 1978, was contacted by the detectives. She described the terrifying incidents of that fateful evening. She was ambushed in her garage on a peaceful, dark evening in Park Hills, Kentucky. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a man grabbed her from behind. A horrific experience that lasted for 2 excruciating hours ensued. She suffered from severe beatings and torture. He had his way with her first. Next, in an attempt to keep her quiet, the assailant repeatedly struck her and burned her with a cigarette. Cox painstakingly went over the records, piecing together the facts. When he discovered a crucial fingerprint on the victim's vehicle, his efforts were rewarded. They were shocked to discover a match when they ran the fingerprints through their system. Michael Dean Tate was the assailant. It was now his 77th birthday. After this information was found, Michael Dean Tate was detained for abusing a lady in a similar manner in 1978. In addition, he was now under intense scrutiny from Cox and Adams due to his possible involvement in the Carol Sue case. Tate frequently traveled to Kentucky in the 1970s and 1980s for employment. Despite his dubious background, he too vehemently denied any role in the murder. The DNA found on Carol did not match Tate's, which dashed the detectives' hopes that they had finally identified the guilty party. In 1976, Tate was firmly located in Cincinnati according to court records, which put the police back at square one. They were still unable to solve this decades-old riddle. Detectives Cox and Adams turned to Othram Labs, a private organization with a special talent for solving the impossible, for assistance in September 2022. Police can use Othram Labs to determine a person's relationship to another person even if they are not closely connected. This is accomplished by means of specialized DNA testing that examines single nucleotide polymorphisms, which are minuscule variations in DNA, and short tandem repeats, which resemble microscopic patterns in DNA. The authorities can use DNA testing to identify potential family members of the attacker. Othram Labs was assigned this mission in September 2022. It took less than 2 months after finance was secured. Results were returned by Othram Labs by November 2022. The culprit's DNA samples were used to establish a genetic connection. Thomas Dunaway is who he is. The only problem was that Thomas Dunaway had already died in 1990. This implies that his DNA could not be directly matched by the police, yet he had a child who never knew his father. This finding would turn out to be the key to solving the puzzle. To gather DNA samples for comparison, detectives made the trip to see Mr. Dunaway's biological son. The lab yielded an astounding result when comparing the DNA of Dunaway's son with foreign DNA discovered in Carol Sue's clothing 46 years prior. Carol Sue Claver and her family would eventually receive justice in December 2022, nearly 46 years after the atrocity. The DNA results unequivocally demonstrated that Thomas W. Dunaway was the man they were searching for. When Thomas W. Dunaway took Carol Sue's life, he was just 19 years old. He was able to avoid prosecution for several years, but the cops' unceasing pursuit of him finally caught up with him. Detectives could look into his former life and the crimes he committed now that they had a name. More proof that he resided close to De Valle Park was discovered. Carol Sue was last spotted here with a man who looked a lot like Dunaway. They discovered more damning evidence as they dug further. Thomas Dunaway did not commit crimes only once. He abandoned the cars he drove and went on a 6-month criminal rampage. Even after Carol Sue Claver passed away, he continued his illegal behavior. Only 6 months after Carol Sue's terrible death, he was also found guilty of taking the life of another individual in Boone County. Ronald Townsend, then 19 years old, was discovered shot and bleeding on the ground on a December night in 1976. He was sent to the hospital after suffering serious injuries. He passed away from his wounds 4 days later, leaving his family in mourning. Dunaway has a history of committing crimes, leaving his cars behind and running from the scene. Detectives found him because of his passion for automobiles. Dunaway purchased a two-tone 1973 Chevrolet Monte Carlo in May 1976. He picked Carol Sue up at the park in the same vehicle. Following Carol Sue's murder, he traded it in for an orange Chevy Vega. He sought safety in Fort Carson after fleeing Union, Kentucky. He was able to distance himself from Carol Sue's case thanks to this car swap. However, the orange Vega he was driving was the vehicle he used to shoot Ronald Townsend. Many witnesses saw the orange Vega that the shooter drove off in, but no one saw who the perpetrator was. The investigator made an effort to find his highly noticeable orange Volkswagen Vega. After a protracted pursuit, he was apprehended in South Carolina on Christmas Eve of 1976 and charged with arson of another person's vehicle and unlawful handgun possession. He entered a guilty plea and was given a life sentence. Sadly, Dunaway's sentence was shortened, and after spending just 7.5 years in prison, he was out early on parole in 1984. There were unsettling parallels between Ronald Townsend's and Carol Sue's horrific murders. It was almost as though the victims were being taunted by the government when they were abandoned in full view next to the roadway. The attacker appeared to be trying to convey a message. In all instances, numerous people spotted the man in question's fancy car, but not the real culprit. A more thorough examination showed that the U.S. Army was not the only organization hunting for Dunaway. In addition to the police, they were also considering him. It's interesting to note that Dunaway joined the Army 9 days after killing Carol Sue. After serving in Fort Knox at first, he was moved to Fort Carson in Colorado. After killing Townsend, Thomas Dunaway left the Army after just 6 months of service and went missing. It's still unclear how Carol Sue Claver and Thomas Dunaway are related. Detectives had nothing except theories. There was no hard proof of how the two of them knew one another. Given that they attended the same schools in the Erlanger-Ellesmere Schools District, it was possible that they were friends from childhood or schoolmates. However, if that had been the case, Dunaway would have been recognized at the park by someone. Devo Park may have the key to the mystery, according to Detective Cox. Given Carol's reputation for being outgoing, it's likely that Dunaway and her initial encounter occurred there. Perhaps that night she went on her first date with Dunaway. If Dunaway had still been alive, investigators could have charged him with Carol Sue's execution based on the hard DNA evidence they had against him. Nevertheless, investigator Cox was able to secure a court order to have Dunaway's 1990 burial site excavated. This made it possible to obtain a direct DNA sample for the Carol Sue case, but more significantly, it meant that his DNA would be added to the combined DNA index system, which might connect it to other unresolved murders. Even while the case may not have ended with justice done, Dunaway's identity was made public, which provided some closure. Given his background, his criminal past, and his 1984 release from jail, there are legitimate questions over the actual degree of justice rendered. Even while there is some resolution, it highlights how intricate the criminal justice system is. Moving on to the next case. Kayla Unbejan. The mother of 9-year-old Kayla Unbejan, 40-year-old Heather Unbejan, and her disappeared from South Elgin, Illinois, on July 4, 2017. Kayla was to return to her father, 43-year-old Rihanna Skirka, who had full custody of her, on July 5th. No one knew where she or her mother had gone. Kayla's family and the community searched for her non-stop for years after she was abducted, until an unexpected incident eventually happened. But how on earth could Kayla disappear? For how long was she apart from her family? South Elgin is a quiet neighborhood in Kane County, Illinois. There are more than 23,000 residents, creating a friendly neighborhood where people know one another by name and where doors are regularly left open. The peaceful environment of living here has been enhanced by the effect of Windy City, which is close. The historical and recreational features in the community will appeal to adventurers as well as history aficionados. However, a terrible event that occurred in 2017 marred the beautiful setting. The town's reputation for low crime was damaged by an unforeseen event. This served as a sobering reminder that security can be compromised even in friendly environments. On July 5, 2008, Ryan Skirku and Heather Unbejan welcomed Kayla Unbejan into the world in the western suburbs of Chicago. When the couple eventually got divorced, a judge decided that Kayla's father ought to have complete custody of the child. With this court ruling, Kayla's life entered a significant new chapter. Because Heather was still permitted to spend certain weekends with her kid, Family ties continued even after the divorce. 2017's 4th of July promised to be a festive occasion. Kayla was supposed to return home to her father, Ryan, the next day after celebrating the holiday with her mother. Ryan had no idea how the events that were going to unfold would impact his life in the years to come. Kayla was meant to return to her father on July 5th, which also happened to be her birthday. What should have been a happy and lovely day turned into a somber one. The joyful expectation of a father's hug gave way to a hopeless search when Kayla disappeared. Ryan was happy to go to Heather's house as they had arranged, having left his child with her mother for the weekend. He was eager to spend Kayla's birthday with her, but when Ryan arrived, he noticed that neither Heather nor Kayla could be clearly found. This worried him. Growing anxious and driven to find the truth and find his daughter, Kayla, Ryan took the critical decision to register an official missing persons report as the unsettling puzzle pieces accumulated. Heather later claimed to be taking her kid camping in Wisconsin, according to a family member. Ryan was stunned by their sudden departure. On my way home from work, I stopped by her house to pick up my daughter, but they weren't there. Her family was having dinner at her house when they informed me that she had gone missing from a camping trip and they had no idea where she had been. And no matter what he tried, he could not get in touch with either of them. He called the police to start looking for his missing daughter as soon as he understood how serious the situation was and started to fear the worst. Kayla's mother was watching her at a parade on July 4th in Wheaton, Illinois, when she was last seen. Ryan diligently sought out crucial information and governmental aid from July 2017 to May 2023. He expressed his honest wish to raise money for a specific cause on the GoFundMe website. He had a very clear goal in mind. The funds would be used to employ a private investigator and cover any further costs spent during the protracted hunt for Heather and Kayla. He stressed his family's steadfast commitment to this cause, as well as their safety and eventual reunification. Intentionally, Heather had shut off her phone and erased her social media accounts. Her imprecise notification that she was going on a camping trip to an unknown spot and would be back by 7 p.m. was only known to her closest relatives. When the pieces of the puzzle came together on July 5th, it was revealed through chats with her neighbors that Heather had been spotted loading her stuff into her car. This action occurred not long before her abrupt departure. Heather's absence from a requested court appearance on Friday, June 7th, added to the frightening tale. Her lawyer, bewildered by what had happened and unaware of what was going on, voiced serious concerns. There were a lot of unsolved questions and uncertainties in the story. A mother and daughter inexplicably vanished, casting a shadow over Ryan's life and sparking a community-wide hunt for answers that made for an eerie and depressing picture. In order to facilitate her extradition, Heather was the subject of a federal arrest warrant on July 28, 2017. In 2017, following Ryan's filing of missing person reports, Heather faced charges of child abduction, a Class 4 felony. Heather and the young female were reported missing. Additionally, South Elgin police actively sought out multiple sleds and tips after a court set her bond at $110,000. They also collaborated with law enforcement agencies across to attempt and locate them. The Gulf and Me community responded favorably to Ryan's request for help. Contributions to the campaign over the period of nearly 6 years totaled $2,500, bringing it closer to its $10,000 target. Months passed, then years, and still no leads turned up, so neither the mother nor the child ever showed up. The kidnapping case of Kayla Unbijan was forgotten until 2023, when an unexpected breakthrough occurred. An important breakthrough in the inquiry into Kayla's abduction occurred in November 2022. Thanks to the well-known streaming site Netflix, her story was seen by more people and expanded beyond its initial limits. Kayla made an appearance on the 9th episode of Unsolved Mysteries, a show that aims to shed light on fascinating instances. In the pre-credit scene, where the faces of missing children were deliberately aged to suggest how they could have appeared as teenagers, Kayla's picture was displayed. This important contrast between a photo of a 9-year-old Kayla and a fictitious portrayal of her teenage self happened in just 5 seconds. The Bring Kayla Home Facebook page, created the moment she disappeared, is still being used for communication and planning purposes. The image of the age progression, which depicted Kayla's fictitious appearance as she approached adolescence, was shared on this page and gained over 7,000 followers. This online community's steadfast dedication revealed where compassion and technology converge when seeking solutions. But there was still to be the pivotal moment that would change the trajectory of events. An attentive store owner in the Westgate Regional Shopping Center in Asheville, North Carolina, noticed a mother and a small kid on May 13, 2023. This astute observer thought he recognized their faces even though he wasn't sure at first. A picture of Heather Unbehawn's face reminded her of a story that went throughout the country, and then the horrifying conclusion that Kayla, the missing girl, looked a lot like the little child who was with her. Strike. As soon as the shop owner saw how bad things were, he took action. He contacted the police as quickly as he could. As soon as the authorities received the information, a decision was made. It is roughly 7:26 p.m. As per the release made by the Asheville Police Department on May 13, 2023. Investigating a potential kidnapping, police headed to Plato's Closet in the Westgate Regional Shopping Center. It was revealed to the police upon their arrival that Kayla had been recognized from the Netflix series. This astute assessment sparked a chain of circumstances that resulted in Kayla's father and mother's long-awaited reunion and her mother's incarceration. After 6 hard years apart, Caleb and her father were reunited, ushering in a much-needed moment of harmony and unity. On May 16, 2023, the state's attorney's office for Kane County offered social media commentary regarding the sequence of events. It highlighted the collaboration between the Asheville police and their South Elgin counterparts by talking about the swift action that followed the recognition. This concerted effort led to the prompt identification of the 2 individuals, Heather Unbehawn and Kayla, the long-missing child. Jerry Crouchick, the chief of police in South Elgin, conveyed his gratitude and the excitement that law enforcement agencies and citizens from other states were feeling. The results are pleasing because of these people's persistent efforts. Chief Jerry Crouchick stated that Kayla was in good physical and mental health following her reunion with her father. This positive result gave hope to detectives and families searching for loved ones who had been missing for a long period. Usually, digital breadcrumbs make monitoring easier, but Heather was able to avoid the typical patterns and remain undetected for an extended period of time. Heather could choose to face the criminal extradition accusation by complying or by declining to do so. As a result, on Tuesday, May 16th, she was set free. Her fleeting taste of freedom, however, was short-lived as she willingly turned herself in the next day in Kane County, Illinois, after posting a $25,000 bond. A pivotal moment in the story occurred when she was formally detained on suspicion of kidnapping a child. After the court proceedings, Heather came before the judge on Thursday, May 18, 2023. She was given bail because of her attractiveness and freed with the requirement that she wear an electronic monitoring device. Kayla's father sought a restraining order against Heather. This order required her to remain at least 1,000 feet away from his residence and to not leave Illinois without the judge's prior approval due to the circumstances. A state's attorney's office spokesperson for Kane County revealed the specifics of these legal actions. Heather Unbehawn returned to Kane County Court to enter a plea to the allegation of child kidnapping. She was freed after taking these actions, but only after posting a $10,000 bail and agreeing to wear a GPS tracking device to ensure she followed the guidelines. It's unknown if she looked for legal representation or entered a plea. Ryan requested privacy amid family matters and court processes. He was at the time rekindling his friendship with Kayla, his long-lost daughter. The widespread dissemination of Kayla's tale and the advent of Netflix, a widely accessible streaming service, marked a turning point in the case. The reach of technology brought her story to the attention of the whole public. The impact from this revelation led to the reconciliation of Kayla and her father. It also resolved the enigma surrounding her absence. The episode involving Kayla appears in the 9th episode of Unsolved Mysteries Volume 3, Abducted by a Parent. In this episode, The long-standing mystery is ultimately resolved with Kayla's 6-year recovery, completing the picture. It's encouraging to learn about her finding and seeming well-being even after her extended absence. Ryan, her father, made a statement through the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children expressing his joy and gladness. It was definitely a miracle that Kayla made it home safely after all these years. He conveyed his appreciation to the South Elgin Police Department and all other cooperating law enforcement organizations. The importance of the Bring Kayla Home Facebook page in disseminating information about her and her story was also emphasized by him. Ryan also requested privacy in light of this life-altering event as they proceed on their path of re-establishing their relationship and starting over. Moving on to the next case. Natalie Cochran. Originally from West Virginia, a state renowned for its breathtaking natural beauty and close-knit communities, Natalie Cochran is a registered pharmacist. There, she made a name for herself and her husband Michael Cochran by leading an apparently normal life. It appeared as though Natalie and Michael were living a calm life, but on February 11, 2019, Michael unexpectedly and mysteriously departed away, upending their serene lives. Later that year, a Ponzi scheme came to light, and Natalie found herself in the public eye as more and more claims emerged, raising the possibility that her role in her husband's death was deeper and more malicious than previously thought. Federal prosecutors filed a civil case against Natalie Cochran in July 2019, claiming that she ran a financial scheme with her late husband, Michael. Technological Management Studios and Tactical Solutions Group were the two businesses owned by the Cochrans. They allegedly misled investors into thinking that Tactical had contracts with the government to provide semi-automatic weapons to the U.S. Department of Defense and other defense agencies. With these accusations, a convoluted judicial drama begins. The Cochrans are accused in the civil complaint of misleading investors by giving them the impression that their government contracts were legitimate. Both businesses raised a minimum of $2,500,000 from 11 investors in total. Although substantial returns on investments were promised to investors, the reality was very different. Tactical did not have any government contracts for semi-automatic guns, according to U.S. Attorney Mike Stewart. Rather, the Cochran family is said to have used the investors' money for opulent lodging, fine dining, and other personal spending. Tactical donated to the Shady Spring Youth Baseball League and the football team at Shady Spring Middle School, among other local organizations. Additionally, they gave semi-automatic rifles to Shady Spring High School for a fundraiser where they were used as bingo prizes, with half of the money going to Shady Spring High Volleyball and the other half going to the Shady Spring Youth Baseball League, of which Natalie served as treasurer. This fundraiser raised almost $32,000. Even with the significant contributions, doubts regarding the money's validity started to surface. According to James Quessenberry, a member of the league board, Tactical's $16,680 check bounced, and many unauthorized withdrawals were made from the league account. Financial records were the subject of an internal audit. In July, Natalie filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy as the legal scrutiny grew. According to her bankruptcy documents, she didn't have much money or assets. She claimed to have a whopping $1,400,000 in liabilities and less than $600 in bank accounts. Federal and state investigations into the Cochran family's financial operations were spurred by the charges made against them. A letter claiming that investors would receive their returns on investment at a later time was reportedly sent to investors under U.S. Department of Defense letterhead. Natalie insisted that a large portion of the investment-related data was classified and off-limits to discussion. Natalie stated in a creditors' meeting that she was unable to pay her creditors because West Virginia State Police and federal officials had blocked her bank accounts. Michael Cochran, Natalie's spouse and business partner, passed away at Bowers Hospice House on February 11, 2019, 5 days after he was reported to have struck his head during a seizure. Authorities launched a second investigation because of the circumstances surrounding Michael's death. There were rumors that Michael had visited the hospital several times in the months prior for an undisclosed ailment. The case was being investigated by West Virginia State Police, according to a Raleigh County government official. Unexpectedly, early in September, a court order was carried out and Michael Cochran's body was removed from Sunset Memorial Gardens. According to reports, the court order's copy was sealed until the conclusion of federal and state inquiries into the events leading up to his untimely demise. Natalie insisted that her husband's death came from a seizure that was brought on by an unintentional fall that impacted his head. She denied any knowledge of what had occurred to Michael and claimed that he had been taken to the hospital 20 minutes after falling. Regarding the sequence of events and the presence of other adults in the house in the crucial hours before Michael was admitted to the hospital, there were differing accounts. Nevertheless, Natalie was charged with first-degree murder in November 2021 for killing her spouse. The fact that Natalie was already serving an 11-year federal prison sentence for her role in the Ponzi scheme at the time added fuel to the rumors that she was involved in Michael's demise. At a hearing in a Raleigh County courtroom, things unexpectedly turned out. Natalie showed up in court with cuffs on her hands, a brown skirt, and khaki pants. Her 2 teenage children and other family members were present. The prosecution unexpectedly chose to withdraw its charges against Natalie. The stated explanation was the need for further time to collect proof. The prosecution made a calculated move to enable a second look at Michael's corpse. Ben Hatfield, the prosecutor for Raleigh County, filed the move to drop the charges, citing the importance of re-examining the body to the case. Hatfield went on to say that before formally requesting the exhumation, he had conferred with Michael's relatives. Hatfield did not make the decision to re-exhume the remains hastily. He consulted a specialist to make sure the investigation would produce solid scientific proof. Hatfield's request stemmed from the requirement for a specific test capable of determining the amount of insulin present in tissue samples. When Michael's body was first excavated in September 2019, an autopsy was performed, but this test was not done at that time. There was opportunity for doubt because this particular test was absent. After the examination, Hatfield said there was a very good chance he would re-indict Natalie for her husband's murder. The prosecution's motions were accepted by Natalie's defense attorneys, raising questions about their tactics. Attorney Matthew Victor for Cochran disclosed that this action will give them a chance to obtain additional evidence from the federal probe. Their goal was to establish Michael's knowledge of the Ponzi scheme, a finding that, if accurate, would have a major bearing on the state's case. Even with the indictment withdrawn, Natalie's federal sentence still required her to serve several more years. This fact was taken into consideration when the charge was dropped. While she was serving her federal term, the objective was to carry out the required testing and acquire more evidence. After the hearing, Natalie got a quick opportunity to talk with her family before being led by the police out of the courtroom. She said goodbye to her kids and showed her love for them in a heartfelt conversation. Michael Cochran's parents attended the hearing as well. On October 24, 2023, Raleigh County Prosecutor Ben Hatfield made an announcement regarding the most recent development in Natalie Cochran's case. He stated that a special grand jury had returned a new indictment against Natalie, accusing her of killing Michael. A well-known forensic pathologist from Texas verified that Michael had been murdered once the body was excavated, and he blamed it on the unapproved exogenous insulin that had entered his system. Natalie Cochran is anticipated to go on trial in 2024 and be found guilty of all the accusations against her because the special grand jury session was held so late in its term. Moving on to the next case. The Babes in the Wood murders. The murder case known as the Babes in the Wood murders is among Brighton's creepiest incidents. Regretfully, the case remained unresolved for over 3 decades until fresh evidence was uncovered. The Babes in the Wood murders center on the deaths of fellows, Karen Hadaway and Nicola, 3 9-year-old girls. Nicola and Karen were best friends who lived on the same street in Malscombe, Brighton, England, even though they went to different schools. Around 3:30 p.m. on October 9, 1986, the girls decided to go play after school. Unaware that it would be her final glimpse of the girls alive, Susan Fellows, Nicola's mother, spotted them playing with a roller boot on the street at around 5 o'clock. After Nikolai and Karen left their neighborhood, a 14-year-old friend noticed them hanging out by some of the Lewis Road shops. After that, they were told to go back home because their parents would be worried about them. The girls were also spotted at a police box on Lewis Road about 6:30 p.m., and that was the last time their aliveness was ever seen by anyone. When night fell, it was time to go to bed. However, Hadaway and Fellows were still away from home. Their relatives started to worry. Michelle Hadaway, Karen's mother, called 999 right away to report the two daughters missing. When word got out about the girls' disappearance, the police and hundreds of Molescombe residents launched a major hunt for them. During the course of the search, someone claimed to have heard Nikolai Fellows telling Karen Hathaway something the night they were last seen going to the park. "Come on, let's head over to the park," Nicola remarked, alluding to Wild Park, where they were not allowed. After learning this, the search team concentrated on locating the girls in Wild Park. The bodies of Karen Hathaway and Nicola Fellows were found in Wild Park in the afternoon of October 10, 1986. The girls were found in an artificial cave. Additionally, an autopsy later revealed that they had been strangled and sexually abused. Brighton was rocked by the killings of the babes in the wood. Residents of Molescombe were perplexed as to who might have brutally attacked and killed the two endearing girls. The two sweet girls were raped and killed by the Sussex police. Following the start of the Sussex police's investigation, witnesses reported seeing a young guy by the name of Russell Bishop close to the Lewis Road police box where the girls had been spotted. They verified that he was dressed in what looked to be a light blue top, which would be found close to the crime scene by the police. Around 6:30 p.m., another Wild Park. The police had a suspect by now. On October 31, 1986, they located Russell Bishop and placed him under arrest in connection with the killings of the girls. This happened after he was questioned and provided several alibis and contradicting statements. Bishop was charged on December 3, 1986, with the murders of Karen Hathaway and Nikolai Fellows. He was detained while waiting for the next year's trial. Russell Bishop, a 20-year-old roofer and sporadic burglar, was a member of the search squad that hunted for the girls prior to his arrest. He claimed that during the search, his terrier Misty had an insurance cover for £17,000 because it was such an excellent tracker dog. Although Russell Bishop lived in the nearby Brighton community of Hollingdon, he was widely known in Molescombe. It seemed that he was acquainted with the families of the girls he killed. At the time, Dowie Judd, a friend of his, was lodging with the Fellows family. Bishop used to play cricket and football with Barry Fellows, Nicola Fellows' father. He also went to Nicola Fellows' house the day the girls disappeared, hoping to talk to his buddy who was staying there, but Nicola Fellows instructed him to go. The girls' parents in both cases advised them to stay away from Russell Bishop because of his reputation for showing sexual interest in young girls. However, Bishop frequently asked them to do errands for him and his expectant girlfriend, Jenny Johnson. He lived with his fiancée and their son, but there were rumors that he had a lengthy history of partnerships. Bishop was having an affair with a 16-year-old who lived next door to the girls at the time of the deaths. Russell Bishop's demise was ultimately caused by his close ties to the girls' quest. It was said that he led the authorities to the location where Nikolai and Karen were found. Russell Bishop was declared not guilty in the first trial in 1987, despite a 4-week trial held at Lewis Crown Court. This was partly due to errors made by the prosecution team. After a mere 2 hours of jury deliberations, Russell Bishop was found not guilty of the girls' rape and murder. Since no temperature readings were obtained on the body, it was impossible to determine the exact moment of Nikolai Fellows and Karen's passing. Due to the lack of scientific proof, the prosecution was only able to claim that the girls had been killed between 6:15 and 6:30 p.m. Russell Bishop's evasive and contradictory alibis went unchallenged as a result. Furthermore, no analysis was done on the blood discovered on Karen Hathaway's underwear, and neither were the handprints or hand measures around the girls' necks checked for fingerprints. In addition, a blue Pinto sweatshirt bearing the identical logo as the one Russell Bishop was observed donning on the day of the murder was discovered nearby, but the defense cast doubt on its veracity due to the police's carelessness in safeguarding the evidence. Throughout the trial, Bishop maintained that the blue clothing was not his. Jenny Johnson, Bishop's ex-girlfriend, admitted to police that the cloth belonged to him, but when she went to the witness box, she refuted this. Following the back and forth in court with no thoroughly investigated evidence, Justice Cheeseman, the presiding judge, instructed the jury to acquit unless they were positive that the girls had died by 6:30 p.m. Russell Bishop was released from prison due to insufficient evidence. Nikolai's father, Barry Fellows, was detained in 2009 on charges of planning to rape his daughter. Bishop's companion Dougie Judd was also taken into custody on suspicion of rape. However, a Sussex police spokesman later stated that the inquiry into the allegations of sexual assault was unrelated to the current murder investigation, leading to their release without being charged. The detectives at the time put in a lot of effort to identify the murderer, but they were limited in their efforts because DNA technology had not advanced by the 1980s. For over 30 years, the Babes in the Wood killings remained unsolved. Relatives and friends of Karen Hadaway and Nikolai Fellows met with the Sussex Police Department on the 30th anniversary of their deaths, seeking a re-examination and reopening of the case. Thanks to developments in DNA technology in 2016, the investigators were able to connect Russell Bishop to the odd DNA samples found at the crime site. Bishop and the abandoned blue shirt were linked by a 1 billion to 1 DNA match, according to Eurofins Forensic Services. Bishop's DNA was also found on a tape that was removed from Karen Hathaway's left arm. Although they lacked sufficient evidence to indict Russell Bishop at the time, the police had always felt that he was the suspect. But when he did the same thing again in 1990, they began to hunt for ways to prove he was the one who had killed the Babes in the Woods. Russell Bishop was detained and charged for a terrible attack on a 7-year-old Brighton child in 1990, 4 years after the kid was murdered. He had taken the 7-year-old girl from the street on February 1, 1990, placed her in the trunk of his car, and driven to Devil's Dyke, where she had been beaten, strangled, and left for dead in a bush. She managed to make it to the side of the road by some miracle, where she was discovered and saved by kind individuals. Subsequently, the victim was able to recognize Russell Bishop as the attacker. He was accused of committing a crime that appeared to be the same as the Babes in the Woods killings later in 1990. Bishop was placed under arrest pending his trial. In December of the same year, Russell Bishop's trial resulted in a conviction for kidnapping, indecent assault, and attempted murder. After that, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 14 years advised to pass before he could be released. His crime spurred detectives to delve more into the murder cases of Nicola Fellows and Karen Hathaway. The Criminal Justice Act of 2003 removed the double jeopardy laws, allowing for the discovery of fresh evidence against Russell Bishop. This led to the holding of a new trial over 30 years after the girls' murders. Russell Bishop was taken from his jail cell to a police station in May 2016, when he was detained once more in connection with the murders of Karen Hadaway and Nikolai Fellows. A December 2017 decision by the Court of Appeal reversed the 1987 acquittals and allowed for a new trial. October 2018 saw Russell Bishop's trial at the Old Bailey. With the help of modern technology, the prosecution was able to create a new timeline showing that the girls were still alive at 6:30 p.m. and that Bishop had returned to Wild Park to finish what he had begun. Bishop was finally found guilty of his charges on December 10, 2018. Following a 9-week trial and 2.5 hours of deliberation, the jury found the defendant guilty. Justice was eventually served to the families of Nikolai Fellows and Karen Hadaway when Russell Bishop was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum suggested term of 36 years. But on January 20, 2022, at the age of 55, he died of cancer. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with us. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries. Your support helps us bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like us to cover next. See you in the next video, and remember, the search for truth never stops.